of dollars and billions of pounds, but no real money was actually printed, because it would take a big printing machine to produce billions and billions of pounds. And you are going to see these banknotes, but you don't see any banknotes increasing in circulation. What it's meant by issuing this quantitative easing is to just write checks and credit it to the banks. The bank then lend the money in the form of giving credit to the borrowers, but the borrowers also don't see any real cash. It's just credited to his account, and he wants to pay somebody. He doesn't give the person the cash, especially if it is a big sum of money. He issues a check, and the check is then goes back to the bank, and it is seldom that the bank has to pay cash to the person. All the bank does is to credit it to his account, so that when he wants to spend money, he can again issue checks. So you don't see any cash at all. So when banks are given the right to create money, they can create unlimited amounts of money without going through the process of printing currency notes. They used to. There were banknotes when I was a small boy. There were banknotes used, even in Malaysia, issued by the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank and Chartered Bank. But today, banks don't print money anymore. Only authorities print money. And the amount of money they can print is not sufficient to support the multifarious trading and business activities in any community. In Malaysia, for example, if the central bank were to issue all the money that is needed for our daily transaction, then we will be inundated with huge amount of cash, which would be somebody would rob it from us or do something nasty to us to get hold of. But as you know, we all use checks and credit cards and the like. We don't see any money at all. So what is happening, of course, is that while the government may issue real cash, real printed currency notes for us to use for small things, but mainly the money that is used by us is in the form of checks, or nowadays, of course, in the form of credit cards and debit cards. No real cash is involved. This means that the bank can create any amount of wealth. Now, when you give that kind of power to the bank, and you also give to the bank this right to get a fixed return from the money they lend, obviously the banks want to lend more and more money, because anything they lend, they can get a return, a fixed return. It may be 1%, it may be 10%, it may be 20%, but the return is fixed. So even if the borrower goes bankrupt, the banks still make money. Of course, the bankrupt chap will have to lose everything, maybe sell off his property, but the bank does not lose. The bank collects back the money that is lent in the form of properties confiscated, or in the form of whatever cash that they can collect, or the property that they will take as collateral. So the banks do not stand to lose anything when they lend money. So the tendency is to lend more and more money, because they can create the money. You create the money and you lend it. And strangely, when you lend money, it becomes an asset for the bank. It has nothing, but once it issues some loans, that loan becomes an asset to the bank. In the accounting of the bank, that comes in as asset. And of course, if the banks fail to collect the interest and everybody loses money and they cannot get back anything at all, then banks will go bankrupt. But they believe that they will not go bankrupt. And so what happens was that being given this authority, this power, this absolute power to issue credit or to create wealth, they lent more money, ever more money than they have. What happens during the subprime loan was that if you lend money, it becomes an asset to you. So lend as much money as possible and forget about the ability of the borrower to pay back. Of course, if the borrower doesn't pay back, you can confiscate his property. But what was forgotten was that if the borrower borrows the money and does not build anything, there is nothing to confiscate. If it happens with 1, 2, 10, 100 persons, it's off. But when 1 million, 2 million, 3 million people fail to repay the loans that they have taken from the banks must write this down in their books as lost money. And so what happens was that the banks go bankrupt. The banks just cannot get back the money that they created and lent to these subprime borrowers. And so you see great companies like Lehman Brothers and others, these are the huge banks of America, going bankrupt because they have lent out so much money to people who could not pay, and they could not get back either the money or the property that is supposed to back the money. This is the cause of the crisis. But of course, beyond that, there are other abuses. The hedge funds, for example. The hedge funds also lend money, a lot of money, and they borrow also a lot of money from the bank. If you deposit with the hedge funds $1 million, if you have $1 million and you go to the bank and tell the bank, I'm going to deposit $1 million, but I am now going to borrow on the basis of that deposit, I'm going to borrow $30 million, the bank will say no. But it's different with hedge funds. If you put your $1 million with the hedge funds can now borrow 30 million from the banking system. With that 30 million, they will invest. And obviously, if they make a profit, they make a profit on 30 million, not on 1 million. And therefore, they can give to the people who invested with the hedge funds much bigger return than if the owner of the money were to invest himself in the stock market, for example. He would get a return only based on these million, but the hedge funds will get a profit based on 30 million. And of course, the hedge funds expect to pay a much bigger return to the investor and to pay back the loan that they have taken from the bank. Now that will happen, of course, when the investment is very good and there is profit to be made from the investment. But what happens when they invest in something that loses? When they do that, the loss will also be 30 times more than if the initial 1 million were invested. Now when you lose 30 times more, you cannot recover the money. You just cannot recover the money either from the investor or from the market. You cannot recover the money and you cannot pay the investor anything. Indeed, you will ask the investor to increase the investment, but the investor may not have the capacity to increase the investment, but they cannot repay the loans they have taken from the banks. And so the banks now were faced with losses. Because the hedge funds lost, the banks also lost, because the hedge funds couldn't pay back the loans that they have taken. This increased is called leveraging. Leveraging simply means increasing your borrowing, but it's a very nice term to use. People do not know what is happening. They thought there's something has been done to leverage your 1 million into 30 million. So the banks go get bankrupt, the hedge funds go bankrupt, the investors go bankrupt. And when the banks and everybody else go bankrupt, you have a financial crisis on your end. Now it is important to understand this, because if you want to overcome the crisis, you have to understand the causes. Basically, the cause is riba. Because banks make money from fixed return. And the urge, the greed, is to lend more and more money which they don't have. It's fine when they are making profit, but once they lose, once the loans cannot be paid back, the banks will go bankrupt. That is why riba is dangerous. Because you are giving to the banks the right to make money out of nothing. The banks never have assets or investment as much as the amount of money they are lending. I am astounded that during the previous years, lending by banks were very small, about $1 million, $100 million. Today they lend billions of dollars. Tens of billions of dollars. Where does this money come from? How do the banks lend so much money? Where does it come from? Are they keeping all this money in their vaults? Obviously not. They don't have. And they don't even have the gold. Initially they had gold. But of course they went off the gold standard for the simple reason that they just want to have more money than the gold reserve that they hold. So when you go off the gold standard, then you can issue more money. Obviously, the money that you issue without the backing of gold, that money depreciates in value. And the amount of depreciation that you see is tremendous. At the time of Bretton Woods, the amount fixed was $35 per ounce of gold. $35 per ounce of gold. Today it is $1,800 per ounce of gold. This reflects the amount of money that has been issued. Also the devaluation of the money and the inflation that accompanies it. So the whole system has been abused. The banking system has created a lot of greed among people. And because they have so much greed, they begin to do what is not really morally right. Even though legally it may be right, but the abuse of the system led to so-called enrichment of these countries. The Western countries are supposed to be developed. They have very high per capita income. But all these are created out of nothing. Out of banks issuing loans with money that they don't have. And because they were issuing these loans and the amount of money increases so much, everybody wants to have a share of this wealth. And this includes the workers. The workers say, why are they, the investors, the management, the owners, making so much money for themselves? The workers also contribute to the creation of this wealth coming from the industries. So they demanded to be paid higher and higher wages. And of course, Labour parties become governments, and they decided that workers must be paid ever increasing wages, despite the fact of knowing that when you increase wages, you also increase inflation. But never mind, the workers also must have a share. Not so much as a capitalist, but the workers were given what is considered to be a fair share of the wealth. And so wages in these Western developed countries went up through the ceiling, went up through